Portia, what exactly are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to talk about religion and religion's impact on our societies with Dr. W Billings, who earned his PhD at McGill University. He's a historian of religion and the author of a couple books concerning religion. So we're just going to dive right into it.
Thank you so much, Drew, for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Drew, let's get down to the juicy info about religion. Religion can be very controversial in the sense that people always ask, is there really a God? But I think today's motive would definitely not be arguing whether there's a God or not, but really just seeing how religion objectively affects society. So let's break it down. What exactly is religion?
Religion is a very slippery analytical category that has emerged in the West to describe a wide variety of human practices and beliefs. And oftentimes, using the category of religion can be rather imposing because not everything that everyone does is considered religious, at least to them. So it can be controversial. So when thinking about what is religion, we're thinking about an abstraction. It's a term and category that can be quite slippery.
So in that sense, do you think religion is a necessity for people to have?
A necessity for people to have. I think that there are religious dimensions tied to our lives in ways that oftentimes we're completely unconscious of. But whether it needs to be. Well, we could say that as far as human history is concerned, we haven't really known a period in which
Without
it wasn't.
Religion.
What do you think a world would look like without any religion?
That's a good question.
It is a great question, and one that, who knows, if the Earth continues for long enough, we could see something like this. Potentially. It's theoretically possible, at least.
So the religions we have now are essentially have been garnered for decades and decades. And I know at times it becomes quite difficult to think of a world without those religions. But if we look to Greek mythology, for example, people used to pray to sun gods and earth gods, and now that's simply become myth. Do you know why it's become myth? And do you think our religions now have potential of becoming myths, depending on certain shifts in society?
Well, it's difficult sometimes how we use the term myth, right? Nowadays, myth can be seen as something that's storied in nature or in form, but one that people don't sort of ascribe absolute meaning to. Religion is mythic, and so how we sort of distinguish the two can be complicated. But to get to your question, which I think I know where you're getting at, is there a point to which religions now will be
Old news,
right, and mere myth? It's possible, and you do see even today, say in certain religious circles, people regarding their past in as story. And so you can see a certain existential detachment from the weight that these stories had, but they're still active in people's lives and shaping sort of their narrative and their senses to where they come from. So I'm not entirely sure how far we're going to be able to distinguish religion and myth.
And I think that's a difficult question to answer, because if you were to say that religions now would become a myth, it's almost claiming that we're just running out of time, and it's any time now that Christianity will no longer be Christianity.
Well, I feel like in my experience, as far as seeing my friends, my peers, and their parents, and how seriously or dedicated people are to their religions, in the circles that I am involved in, I have not seen as many people in our generation that are very serious and dedicated to religion as their parents or their grandparents or other adults. And do you think maybe there's a shift and we're becoming a little bit less religious as we move on in more generations?
It has been proposed that the world is becoming more secularized, or at least the West is. People have challenge that.
Why is that though?
Why is that? Well, it's complicated. So there's a critique that the secularization theory is itself a myth. And so in some ways it does seem as though people are becoming less religious, but it depends on a lot of variables too. One, how do we define what's religious and what's not? I mean, we also see an increase of people attending yoga classes. That's deeply religious by most people's definitions, yet that often doesn't get counted today as religious participation.
What is the exact definition of religion in relation to yoga, if that's a sensible question?
I mean, at least for myself, when my friends and I go to yoga, I know that we're going because we think we're going to have tighter abs and we're going to, be girlfriends and, whatever. I don't think we're thinking too much about how, I know yoga is supposed to, be more about centering yourself and thinking, in a more spiritual sense, but I think the trend of yoga isn't about that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what that is, if it's a fitness craze or if it...
Yeah, so how can you relate the two in that sense?
Well, then, to take this back then, Paul, has yoga then extended in such a way that it has become just, or demythologized?
Right.
And now it's sort of, the form's there, but the underlying ideology and whatnot isn't. It doesn't seem to even be the case, though. Most yoga classes incorporate meditative practices, which have historically been a primary form of religious connection with the divine. So it's complicated. Also, it depends on what circles you run in, right? I mean, if you came to my classes, you'd probably be shocked as to the number of people who do come from deeply religious homes and traditions, or while at university, turning towards religion regardless of where they came from. So a lot of variables in determining whether we're becoming more secular or if religion's on the rise.
Well, I was just going to say, to bring up the meditation, so I feel like, I've always sort of been taught and learned that meditation was a religious thing or a spiritual thing at least, but now I think when you go to therapy or when you talk about stress relief or something that you wouldn't necessarily consider religious, they tell you to meditate. They tell you, you learn meditation steps, and it's not so much about religion as much as it is about stress relief and therapeutic reasons.
So to be religious, do you necessarily need a god? So in that sense, can meditation be religious without the god figure involved?
There have been several traditions that have been deemed religious, quote unquote, that category has been applied to them, that have been non-theistic. So it's possible, it's imaginable that one can construct religion and inhabit a religious modality without there being a divine God figure.
That's interesting. Especially because I feel like people use religion with the intention of meaning there's a God involved in the conversation.
And that has everything to do with the sort of triumph of Western monotheism to the Western imagination of what is religion. But it certainly doesn't monopolize the category of what is and isn't religion.
If Portia and I go to yoga and we do end up meditating and we do end up finding inner peace and inner strength, could you essentially consider us religious people in that way?
Deeply and profoundly. One of the beautiful things that yoga does is it connects you to yourself and to others. It's more common to attend yoga classes in community,
right,
rather than as sort of a one-on-one sort of instructor,
right,
protege sort of model, or with oneself, though obviously you can.
Right. So the proper term for that would be non-theistic religion.
Sure.
Interesting.
I wonder if our generation's obsession and addiction to technology has anything to do with becoming less religious, because we have so many more distractions and we have all of these movies and media and things that we're thinking about other than, maybe something that we're believing in and practicing in a way. I don't know. I feel like our generation is always multitasking, texting somebody on Twitter at the same time,
And I think this might be taboo to say, but would you say that the technology gives us more answers that we don't necessarily need to seek from a god to find?
I think that's quite plausible. I think it's a really good observation that we're now living in a digital age and that our own humanness is changing with it, and maybe so also our need for religion. Religion's becoming more digitized now as well, though. I mean, you can find a myriad of online Bibles, for instance, or you can attend church virtually. You also thinking, though, about sort of the place in which social media has arisen in our lives. It's like, what is this filling? It's fulfilling our need to be with one another. Whether it's doing that well or not can be critiqued, but it simulates a type of church or congregation or community of faith in that it brings together people who share things in common with you.
So could social media be considered religious?
Deeply.
Interesting. One question I really have that I've been pondering for a while is whether religion is subjective or objective. And an example I want to give is I know of someone who believes that the God they believe in is their objectivity. So what their God says goes. And in that sense, if their God says that, for example, marriage is supposed to be between man and woman, that's objective fact, and they don't want to necessarily stray away from that. So in that way, would you say that religion is subjective or objective by nature?
Well, I think the example that you just gave, your friend, to the best of their knowledge, is operating as though they are objective.
Right.
I would see that is that their own subjectivity is treating religion as an objective. It's
That's
still their
inception.
subjectivity.
That's total inception right there.
So, also, I mean, if you want to talk about the commandment that marriage should consist of man and wife, I would say that that's a subjective construction.
Right.
Even if you're talking about Hebrew Bible material, there are a variety of metaphors for what human cohabitation looks like. Some of those include male-female bonds. Certainly not the only models that are provided, even within the Bible itself. So, I would say that there's plenty of indication that there's human subjectivity to how they're constructing themselves as religious.
So, I think a way we can take this involving politics and religion, I was told the other day a concept that I feel I never had really thought about, and I think it would apply right now. But I have a friend she's from Tennessee, and she's Christian, and because of her values, obviously, she doesn't necessarily believe that gay people should be allowed to marry, but she has a lot of gay friends. So when voting came around last year, or 2 years ago, in order to determine whether gay marriage should be legalized, it's almost like she had a difficult time deciding what she truly believed in, because she had gay friends that she felt should have the right to marry, but her religion almost convinced her otherwise. So she almost found herself in like an identity crisis because she didn't know what she truly believed in. So as an American and as like a democratic society, do you feel like people should set religion aside to allow Americans to have rights in general, and then take on their religion in a more independent way? Or is it ethical to allow religion to influence people's like methods of voting?
I think
if that makes sense.
I think it's a great question, and I like how you put it. I think what you're getting at, though, is a problem with democracy itself. The extent to which we vote representing our own interests, and the extent to which we wish to choose to represent the interests of others. So in the same way, can we separate ourselves from our class biases in voting, or should we? Or racial sort of identities or sexual identities or whatever it may be. So there is a problem with democracy in how one chooses to relate to the common good. and where their own interests, how their own interests relate to it. So I don't know how to answer it. I just know that religion is one of many things people have to make decisions about when making political decisions.
I think that also begs the question of, are we voting for a common good or for our own good?
Yes.
And, that's dependent on who you are and your own beliefs. But I want to raise this interesting question. I'm not really sure how to put it, but do you think that it could ever be possible for maybe, any religion, maybe the Christian religion, to as a whole say, okay, we're still, living by the Bible, but we want to say that we accept gay marriage now, because we have the current
Portia
pope who
is out here killing it.
Yeah, just me being smart and stuff. But we have the Pope getting in trouble, right, for speaking and supporting gay marriage. And so, do you think that's possible? Will my best friend's mom ever say that she's okay with it? Ever.
Is it okay for Pope Francis to suddenly say, you know what? No. we're just kidding. It's okay to be gay. Is that feasible? Is that possible? Are they?
And then everyone else to say, okay, yes, let's go.
Is that a possibility? Can you simply reinterpret the Bible a different way just to appeal to the masses?
Absolutely. Whether it's done in order to appeal to the masses, is sort of a side sort of issue. But religions change fundamentally over the course of their development. Catholicism is a prime example. What you know as modern Roman Catholicism looks very different from medieval Roman Catholicism.
I almost want to ask, is that allowed?
It's a part of what religion is and does. It's constantly changing and evolving. And there's no such thing as a static religious tradition. Rather, people claiming that their traditions are static and sort of epitomizing sort of their ancient forms. But that's very much a rhetorical claim, or a polemic, you might say. So it exists at this time. There are liberal forms of religion where not only are people allowed to engage in same-sex marriage and be full-standing members of the church, you can be the minister. It's called liberal Protestant Christianity, and it used to be mainline, but for a variety of reasons has been sort of underrepresented as part of the religious landscape and the options of religious movements in today's world.
I just feel like that almost, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it almost makes the religion less valid, and that you can simply just change what's not liked in order to appeal. Because in that way, then, is the religion really the religion it was once? And if you can just change it like that, then how do we know that other parts of the religion are valid, if you can just change it so easily?
Right. And this is the problem, right, is that religions often have a hard time admitting how they have changed, because of the rhetoric within religious discourse of continuity and unchanging sort of linear continuity from now to the past, which of course we know these are sort of rhetorical strategies to legitimize one's own view, is that you hold the same view that your forefathers held centuries before, and that somehow enhances. But it very much is a rhetorical move, more so grounded than in anything, with reality of practice and belief and whatnot. So
we touched a little bit on this with the technology question, but science. So obviously, every year there's so many, science discoveries. Do you think that science could be the religion of modern day almost, or is science at all religious? Or if something is proven, does that mean it's not religious? Can you speak about just science and our new discoveries and sort of what that means for our generation?
By the way, if you are loving Portia's questions, feel free to text us at 786-309-8861 if you are loving Portia's questions or just want to give her a shout out. 786-309-8861.
I would send a text right now if I had my phone. This is another great question. It has been posited that religion is a there's a way in which humans have tried to make meaning of their world in the pre-scientific age. Now that science has taken over as a dominant sort of worldview, then religion is sort of eclipsed in its purpose. What's strange, what's happening though, is actually quite different. Is that there's been an intensification of religious identification and participation in this scientific age. So I can't say in the short amount of time all the ways in which religion and science both parallel and intersect, but I can say that the development of science technology has not meant the abolishment of
Well,
religion.
what do you think leads people to say, I don't think we, we came from monkeys or apes, or
that the Earth is flat.
or I don't, maybe just totally refute something that's been proven or something that might have a lot of evidence behind it and say, no, I think we came from Adam and Eve, or I think, what have you.
What do I think about the religious people who reject scientific
How is it possible to reject something that maybe is totally proven?
And how can you reject that but accept other scientific findings? It's almost like you're choosing to accept what you want to.
Sure. Well, I have some experience with this. I came from the Midwest, where I went to college in Cincinnati, which was close to the Creation Science Museum, right? And the Creation Science Museum is a $100 million institution in the middle of Kentucky that represents the Christian story of creation as scientific fact and leads you in this museum-like tour through stories of the Bible. So it epitomizes sort of this community, I think, that you're talking about. And what it does some funny things along the way. It places dinosaurs in the same age as Adam and Eve, and so you see statues of humans with dinosaurs. But because the dinosaurs, according to the Christian creationists, were vegetarians, they're smaller in scale, so they actually stand at about the same height as the humans. So a whole bunch of interesting stuff going on there.
Are these just scientific claims or just assumptions about dinosaurs?
This is grounded in scientific claims. Most, of course, would claim that this is pseudoscience, a type of gross hybridization of religion and science. But this exists, and it exists everywhere, and we're probably not going to get away from it, and that these groups will exist. I think the number is diminishing, though I don't have any sort of data that actually supports this. But more and more, there are these traditions of possibilities in which people have been able to fuse the religious and the scientific as complementary rather than contradictory. So now that those exist, it sort of diffuses some of the angst people have in trying to reconcile their science with their religion.
So you studied also in Canada. Do Canadians have a different experience with religion than Americans, would you say? Because, I mean, in my own mind, we are sort of similar to them, we were right next to them, and I would think that, it might be sort of similar, but do you think that there's any major differences or major similarities that you saw?
And is religion, because I know religion impacts our government because it's found in almost like every facet. Is religion as big a part of Canada as it is in the United States, like historical founding?
Great questions. One of the greatest things about living in Canada was paying attention to all the similarities and differences. Though they're just our northern neighbor and, that have developed sort of alongside in parallel with us, there are striking differences. And one of the differences is the religious history of Canada is markedly different from the religious history of America. Part of that has to do with the colonial origins and the role that religion played in early European colonizers and who colonized what sections of each country. But then again, so Canada is also deeply religious in the way that Americans deeply religious. The most beautiful cathedral I've ever seen in my life is St. Joseph Oratory in Montreal. It's just it stands with the cathedrals in Rome. It's an absolute monument. It almost sings when you see it. So in very interesting ways, there are similarities in that religion is respected and that it's a part of the origin stories and the process of colonization and the missionary endeavors, but it's different in marketed ways.
So obviously religion brings a lot of people together, and a lot of communities and families can really bond and support each other in religion, but at the same time we see a lot of adversity because of religion, and a lot of differences are created, and wars are happening, and family ties are broken, and people, leave families. Why is there that disconnect? If religion is maybe meant or intended to be something that creates love and creates bond, why do you think it allows or almost encourages fighting and violence?
This is the sort of the dual side, or the two-headed coin of religion, and yes, it's pertinent to notice that in all of the ways that religion can perform social good, it can also just as equally as well, you might argue, perform social ills, and so it has this dual side to it, that it can be a social congealant, or it can be something that separates and fundamentally divides a society. So I don't know where the question is, but to appreciate it is, yes, it has these two sides. It's a two-headed dragon, you might say. But it's profound on both ends of that spectrum. The amount of good that can be inspired from religion is radical, and it's awe-inspiring, as is the violence and the horror.
I feel like it just seems that religion was made almost to direct people in a positive direction, but people are so imperfect and flawed that it's almost difficult to really follow the tenets that religions want you to follow. So in a sense, do you think religion was maybe a way of aligning humanity in a more morally erect fashion? Is it a matter of like suppressing the human condition so that we don't mess up as much as our nature would predispose us to?
So this model of religion then is one of social control, a way of conditioning humans to act in accordance with a certain vision of the good. It has those aspects, right? And that's what sort of ethical systems do in general, and religion, in the West at least, has ethics built into it, embedded into it. So yeah, but I don't think it's any different than, say, the economy, and the way that participating in the economy conditions people towards certain social goods. It's one of the social forces that make up our sort of system of motivation, or whatever it is that drives us.
Okay, guys, you're listening to Talking Taboo. This is Paul, Portia, and Dr. Billings. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back on our conversation of religion.
Am I doing this right? Can't you see the signs that I'm giving you? Is it getting through? Can't you see how I feel? Can't you tell that it's real? Can't you see what you've got? Here's what I really want. yes to you. Gotta make things complicated. Gotta make me so sick of waiting. Gotta make me insane. Gotta make me complain. Baby, why you so frustrated? Don't wanna seem like I'm trying too hard, but it's never easy with someone naive as you are. What do I gotta do to make it clear in my mind? Baby, be mine. I want your kiss, I want your love, I want to be your only one. Yeah, you're my only thing, be my everything tonight. I want your touch, I want your heart, I want to never be apart. Yeah, you're my only thing, be my everything tonight. And you're my everything. I do anything for you, boy. You, yes to you. You're my everything. I do anything for you, boy. You, yes to you.
What's up, everyone? We're back with Mr. Drew Billings, who, by the way, wrote a book.
Dr. Drew Billings, Paul, don't be
Sorry, I'm
respectful.
just jealous of his PhD. But his book is The Acts of the Apostles and the Rhetoric of Roman Imperialism. Get it at your nearby Books A Million. So we were recently talking about religion and its effects on society, and now we're going to get a little more personal about it.
I just
So,
want to
Portia,
point something out really quickly,
are
Paul.
you going to throw shade at me?
Oh, no shade. So you have, you guys can't see this, but Paul has these lovely earrings. How many piercings do you have?
I have a good 5 piercings.
Paul has 5 piercings on his ears, and in your right ear you have a cross hanging. I know that you are Muslim. You're right?
So, actually, my mother's Muslim, for those listening, but I myself don't affiliate with a religion. But yes, I am wearing a cross. It's Gochi and Gabbana. I'm just
Is it
kidding.
really? No, it's not.
No, it's just a cross from Walmart, but...
Is it from Walmart?
It is from Walmart.
I love that.
$7 if you guys want to try one out. But I specifically wear it mostly because I tend to believe that the cross itself, although it is symbolic of the Christian religion, it doesn't necessarily belong to the Christian religion. And I think that's an important conversation to have because...
Why do you think it doesn't belong? Then who owns it?
So, if,
Where
for
is this
example,
patent?
if we bring up a new religion and that religion uses the circle as its main symbol, I don't think the circle would necessarily belong to them.
Is that why you have a hoop in your other ear to
And that's
symbolize
why I
the
hoop.
circle?
Yes, the circle is
The bigger
for a
the
more
O, the
liberal
bigger the O.
religion.
Great, love it.
But in that sense, I think seeing past the rigidity of what things are is quite important because even though the cross is an important, I mean,
it's
tenet.
interesting. The cross has become a very fashionable symbol.
Right.
In our, you see people all the time wearing a shirt or any sort of
In a
jewelry
non-religious
in a
sense.
non-religious way, and upside down crosses are in right now. The sideways cross necklaces that go like that. I wonder, maybe Dr. Billings, you have any sort of insight on this? Why our generation has, maybe Christians, maybe not Christians, are wearing the cross.
Is it rebellious? Is it on purpose? Am I doing
It has
this on purpose?
it has an edgy feel.
I feel edgy. I feel beautiful.
Well,
I wouldn't pretend to know anything about your generation. They're, pretty much a mystery to me, which I'm fascinated by and can't wait to.
Would you mind
continue to
telling us
observe.
how old you are, actually?
Yeah, 34 years old, as far as I remember.
Okay. That's
and there's a baby seat on your bike,
There is a baby seat and a basket. Yeah,
interesting.
so you have a
How-
child.
I do.
How are you? Are you raising this child religious?
Well, she is 3 years old
Dun,
in
dun,
3
dun.
months, so we're talking 2 years and 3/4.
Okay.
As of today, actually. So we've been going to a Unitarian Universalist church in Miami, which I'm normally pretty embarrassed to disclose that because as far as the Christian imagination goes, is very sort of marginal.
Right.
As far as its status, almost non-Christian entirely, though it does come from Christian tradition.
Do you feel like a minority in your religion?
Well, as one who attends a UU church, everyone admittedly is just kind of religiously a little weird, or coming at it from a different perspective, so I feel very normalized. And in fact, they incorporate mindfulness techniques that I just absolutely love. So I go with a decent attendance. But it wasn't the tradition I grew up in, and probably not the one that I'll stay in for long term, but for the time being. So Marilyn goes, but she was baptized as an infant in the United Church of Christ. So when it comes to denominational affiliations, we can get rather confusing. And maybe this has something to do with millennials and the cross. Not sure, but it seems as...
Well, I want to add really quickly that
Yeah.
it's not even just the cross, but also you see Buddha everywhere on, tapestries, earrings, jewelry.
Yeah.
It's almost mainstream now.
The Om symbol
Right.
is popular, tattoo, the lotus flower. We have all these different religious symbols that people wear, but maybe they're wearing them, it's an edgier, hippie sort of look. And
It's almost like appropriating it to mean something else.
Yes. It seems as though we're challenging this bifurcation of religious and secular, and that this is all going to come down like the World Trade Centers, you might say, just to give it some sort of dramatic visualization. But we're challenging the way we've arbitrarily drawn lines between things. And maybe that's the millennials' contribution to religion, is that the secular is now treated as deeply religious, and the religious can maybe be used in deeply secular ends. I don't know if it goes both ways, but at least one way.
I think when I wear this cross specifically, it's almost like a really, really small mini adrenaline rush, because before I would never wear the cross.
So you're just hyped up all the time when you're wearing it?
I'm just, how the kids say, I'm just lit when I wear the cross.
You're just like totally buzzing?
I'm buzzing right now. I'm on a high right now because I know that I'm wearing
I knew
this
something was
cross
weird. Your teeth were like grinding.
Yeah, I'm just wearing it for my reasons, and I'm not wearing it to necessarily satisfy any like religious beliefs. And this is something my mom completely disagrees with. She feels like it belongs to Christianity and I shouldn't wear it because then people will assume I'm Christian. But for the most part, do you feel like we're digressing religiously? And if so, do you think these trends are like just the beginning?
By saying we're digressing religiously, is religion diminishing in our lives? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Or maybe transforming
or is
into something else.
this jewelry and these symbols that we're wearing, is it a sign of digressing religiously,
Right.
or is it sort of sacrilegious?
Well, I'll just leave the sacrilegious debate to the side, because it's never entirely clear to me what that means to be sacrilegious. But there's something extremely secular or non-religious, or you might say political, about the symbol of the cross itself that lends itself to this type of non-religious description of meaning. So the cross, the reason why we even know about it, right, or the reason why it exists in the Western consciousness, is that it was used as a form of public execution by the Romans. And so Jesus was crucified on a cross, and that's sort of the most famous example of someone who's died. But thousands and thousands of people died by way of crucifixion just in the first century alone. So to think about the cross as a religious symbol actually poses more problems.
Because of
than
its negative
resolves it.
history.
Because of its negative history as a tool of public execution. So it's also then, and Paul, I like this, I think it's edgy, because by venerating the cross, you're siding with those who have been systematically oppressed to the point of death by any regime of power, whether it be Rome, the church, or,
Yes, and I am doing that on purpose. That's exactly why I wear that cross.
There
to
it is.
venerate the millions.
How intellectual of you.
It's a symbol of resistance.
And let me ask you both, if you guys are open to discuss, what are your personal religious affiliations? We can start with Portia.
He already said. Oh, so it's my turn. So I was raised Buddhist, sort of. So, yeah. So I mean, it's not as much of a religion as it is sort of a way of life and a way of thinking. That we're all just one being, and all of our energies are together. And I am not a supporter of eating animals or of killing things, and there's no worshipping that happens in my house. It's more of just mindful of our egos, and that we aren't these egotistical beings, and we're more of part of something much greater, which I think is really the base of all religions when it comes down to it. I think there's so many similarities between religions in the sense of, that it's just there are greater things than our human selves. And that's why I think it's so interesting and upsetting that religion can cause such horror in our world, is because we're all sort of, most of us, or most religions are supporting the same sort of idea that we are one love almost. So.
And now I want to say something. I don't know if you would agree, but I feel like it's almost easy to say that you're Buddhist because there isn't as much of a negative stigma to it as if someone were to say they were Muslim, So like in specific parts of the United States, almost like if you say you're Buddhist, it's almost like, wow, that's so cool,
Well, it's probably different. I'm a white girl with red hair. I don't look like your traditional Buddhist, so that can raise a lot of questions and a lot of interesting, sort of reactions almost. And just the other day, someone asked me, "Oh, like, do you, are you in any sort of Buddhist groups, or do you hang out with anyone?" I was like, no one really knows. No one really, unless you ask me, what is your religious, stance or spiritual stance, rather. Then you might not ever think so. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what it's like to tell someone that they're Muslim. But I do know we have obviously a problem right now in our country with people having a negative connotation of it. And I can't imagine. And I think that's incredibly upsetting. But yeah, I mean, that is the reaction that I get from a lot of people. Oh, that's so cool, like, do you go to Buddhist temples and right, and like, do your family make tie-dye, and you know what I mean? It's interesting, and it's cool because I think a lot of people in our generation, at least a lot of people in my personal circles, have said, I think if I were to identify with any sort of religion, it would be Buddhism. Because of the non worshipping and sort of
the non-theistic, is that the word? There we go. We live in the word. The non-theistic approach to it.
Right. Well, we have our God is one. We are all God. We are all God together. And so, I guess maybe.
So, what exactly is Buddha?
Well, so Buddha, there can be like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but so the what you would say, as far as I know, what you would think when you think of an image of Buddha is probably like Siddhartha Gautama, who was like a real person and just a great person. And so you become a Buddha when you're enlightened, and sort of like enlightened means that you're able to let go of your ego and let go of, I wouldn't be Portia Baudisch anymore. I would understand like that I'm just sort of part of this whole energy. So you would be
a Buddha, as opposed to worshipping a Buddha.
Right, yes. That's why there's no worship. Yeah. So it's almost similar to Nirvana in the sense that you can reach, that in your lifetime. Maybe. And so, I mean, so that's why it's cool. So, yeah, I don't know.
Are there any particular like unconventional practices that Buddhists do? So for example, Muslims pray 5 times a day. Is there anything distinctively different?
So there's like so many different kinds of Buddhism. So, but my father's Nichiren Buddhist. So what he practices is he chants every day for I think about an hour, and
that's actually really cool.
And so we've gone as a family to meditation. We do sitting meditation, walking meditation, which is just practicing letting go of everything around you, even if you're hearing sirens outside, to be able to accept the sound and let it go and not be in your thoughts, really not even thinking. And it's really interesting and such a difficult thing. But so I don't know if there's any. We don't eat animals.
Right.
I guess that's a little bit unique to Buddhism, but
Portia and I actually went to Taco Bell the other day, and she waited in the line two more times just so we can get our burritos without meat.
Yeah, they give us the wrong order. It was very upsetting.
Yeah, but she was nonetheless a very kind Buddha about it. She was very very patient, and she said, "I'm sorry, but this wasn't our order. Could we get a new one?" And they did that. So she's definitely a very good influence. And I want to touch on my personal testimonies. My mom is Muslim, and I have a lot of Muslim friends, and my grandparents are Roman Catholic, and I think something I've noticed and some similarities I've noticed every time I go to the church or the mosque is that the main objective is always finding, inner peace. Mm-hmm. And when I'm at the mosque, it's almost like all the practices we do are in order to find that calmness inside of you, regardless of your obstacles and your circumstances. So I feel like, if anything, like you said, religions all have that same goal, and it's almost as though every religion is just pointing to the same direction. Each one is just a different interpretation of how to get there. And so I have a friend who believes in the universe, and that the universe gives her signs, and the universe speaks to her, and the universe grants you obstacles so that you can grow as a person. And my friend who's Muslim, she believes that God gives you these obstacles so you can grow. So it's almost like, in both cases, the universe is giving you obstacles. It's just a different word for it, but then the ultimate goal is self-development and self-growth. And I think it's just interesting that there are so many religions, because it almost makes sense, because people are so creative and people are so different, that it almost makes sense that people will see things in different ways and have different names for their gods. So, go ahead.
To chime in here, I really appreciate hearing the religious backgrounds of both of you. I'm shocked to hear, one, Paul, that you're Muslim, and two, Portia, that you're Buddhist.
I'm actually not Muslim. Just non-Muslim.
Okay. But your mother is.
My mother is, yes.
I think both of those sort of identity categories are absolutely punk rock. So I'm intrigued by how you express these. Now, it's been criticized, though, to approach religion in such a manner that all of these are trying or aspiring towards the same goals, because of the way in which you have to reduce the individual religions in order to get there. There's a lot about being a Muslim that doesn't really fit those narrow objectives, and there's a lot about being a Buddhist that doesn't necessarily fit those narrow objectives, and you could say that about other religions as well. But what I do like about what you're saying is that it's difficult to validate or make claims of superiority of one religion or the next, because there is such so many variables that exist, and it does seem to reflect the diversity of human experience and meaning making and symbol. We need a rich variety of symbol sets in order to encapsulate that. And
I almost feel uncomfortable saying that it does make sense that there are different religions for different perspectives, because I know an argument to that would be like, oh, my religion isn't a perspective, my religion is fact. My religion isn't just another perspective to interpret God. My religion is
mine is the way. Yeah, right.
And so, like, I guess me, from a agnostic point of view, I see religions as like different outlets for the same out goal. But obviously, if you affiliate very strongly to one religion, you won't see it that way. You will see yours as it in the correct way, and it almost, that becomes the controversy: which one is correct, and if so, are there any correct religions, and which one's more correct than another? And I think validity is always a very difficult discussion, but my question to you is, as a religious or as a pious person, should you know every aspect of your religion, and should you be able to answer every aspect and every question posed towards your religion in order to truly be a religious follower?
Yeah, this is a good question. If you do, I would have failed, and I have a PhD in religious studies, and my studies have something to do with the tradition which I affiliate. So there's a certain impossible obstacle there, in that it'll take your entire life. And even then, you might only sort of skim the surface, because all of these traditions have histories that are millennia old, and then when you start talking about sacred texts and the languages involved, it becomes rather complicated. I don't think that you have to be a master of your own religious tradition in order to own the identity category.
Definitely, and I think that I identify with that very much, because I almost get nervous when people say, oh, well, what is it? What is Buddhism? And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what I think when I try when I'm thinking about it, but I can't tell you every sort of, you know what I mean? And so I think that's a great point. And just, I think right before we wrap up, I mean, I feel like we're coming so close to the holidays that I want to bring up Christmas, and I want to think, like,
let's talk capitalism.
I want to talk capitalism. I want to talk commercialism. I want
Santa Claus.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. Do you think that do you think that the Christian religion is happy with how popular Christmas is, for lack of a better word, or do you think that it is bothersome to them that how?
Or are they okay with it because it has such a positive stigma?
Oh,
because if Christmas were a negative thing, then Christians wouldn't associate with it, right? So is Christmas only okay because it brings about these good vibes? And I've also heard many stories that Jesus Christ was not born on Christmas.
This is true.
But rather, not even in the winter season, maybe even in spring, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a whole mythology of how Christmas as we know it came to be.
Right.
And very little of that has to do with the actual birth story of Jesus, which many people sort of argue. There's Christmas wars, of course, but many people argue is the primary sort of symbol of how all of this got started. But you're right, Christmas originally was a holiday of the Roman Empire. And so as the empire becomes Christian, it's a way of consolidating the parties and to channel them towards Jesus. It's complicated as to where it comes from, but how it's taken the form that it has, especially in its sort of hyper-consumeristic sort of form that we know it today, the only connection that has with the birth of Jesus story is that the wise men came to give Mary and the Holy Family gifts, frankincense and myrrh and gold.
What is myrrh?
Oh, it's...
I've asked every year of my life, and I've never been given an answer. What is myrrh?
It smells good.
So it's like a scent in a jar?
Sure, yeah. Whatever it is.
I still haven't gotten an answer.
In antiquity, people smelled all the time. So the need to cover that up with perfumes and whatnot was deemed a luxury good. But anyway, there's no connection. So what we have now is a product of modern capitalistic society that has just gone sort of insane.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about the debt that's accumulated at this time of year, it's...
Yet we still buy incredibly expensive, don't listen mom and dad, things for our children, you know. I mean, my family celebrates Christmas in absolutely no religious way.
Yeah, we love it.
We love it. We have
ourselves.
Gifts, and we give gifts, and we... have dessert and everything, but we don't talk about it. It's not about that. But, I mean, I love it. I think that when you live in the Northeast and it's snowing and it's cold and everything sucks, that you need something like Christmas to be able to appreciate those months of torture.
And my mom is Muslim, and so she's not supposed to celebrate Christmas, but she's the first in line if there's ever a deal at the store. If she hears both, she's like, I'm sleeping overnight, and I'm getting that Victoria's Secret perfume for Christmas.
The myrrh.
The myrrh. Victoria's Secret myrrh. You don't know how to use it.
I love that.
Thank you so much, Drew, for being here with us today.
Yes, this was so great, and
this was very, very
happy holidays, everybody listening out there.
Holidays. Happy non-denominational holidays. My name is Paul Schulz.
I'm Portia Baudisch.
And this is Talking Taboo. We play every Monday from 5 to 6. Thank you guys so much for listening.